Hello again, everyone. Edwin Leonard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and social distancing. I'm going to be, I've noticed that you've had, a lot more social distancing in recent times, and I'm going to be talking about some, current transits that may be tied in with this. Now, first off, you have Uranus and Gemini, and what stands out, with me about this is that it could indicate that friendships, may be more, superficial and on the surface. And, for whatever reason, people may be more averse to, deep connections, at this time, whether it's on a friendship or whether it's actually you're talking about something that could, evolve or escalate into an intimate connection. And also, too, communications are, likely going to be more erratic and sporadic at this time when you have this transit. It's interesting. I've had, going back to, people keeping, friendships superficial and also communications as well. I've had a number of people, that I used to talk more consistently with, have either inexplicably stopped speaking with me, or they'll end the conversation for a while after I've written them, and then all of a sudden they just come back out of nowhere. So it's just a lot of, more flightiness and fickleness, I guess you could say, if that's an actual word, in matters with friendships. And also, the conversations, may be more, unpredictable, and that can include, communications just ending inexplicably or unexpectedly, people coming in and out of one's life, saying like, through communication, people that may have been gone for some time, at the same time may all of a sudden, just write you out of nowhere. But the conversations, again, can be more unpredictable with this transit, and that would include those communications just ending, abruptly. And also, I would expect, as far as like unexpected short journeys, and you probably wonder, well, what does that have to do, with the topic of social distancing? Well, the thing is that people have to just take, an unanticipated, short journey or short trip somewhere, that could indicate, it could be like a diversion or distraction for some people, where they're not, so much as focused necessarily on talking with you. They have to just take off somewhere, on the fly, whether it's an emergency situation or what have you. And also, too, I think what we're going to see, with Uranus and Gemini transit is where, internet, early education, could be more prevalent, and that could indicate like less communication, with one's classmates. And when you have, diminished communications, even with the people, the kids in the early, education, that could, manifest in the distant, social distancing as well, where people are going to be more detached as far as communication goes. Now, the next transit I want to talk about that I think is important as far as, astrology and social distancing goes is the Pluto in Aquarius transit. Because with Pluto in Aquarius, we're seeing already, it could even be the start of the destruction of humanity. And when you have that, when humanity, even, not necessarily just on a literal sense, but maybe, the population may start to diminish at some point in the near future. But when you have, people just being, less humane, it could show the lack of the connection in terms of matters with communication, diminished conversations, because you have less people that are willing to care and reach out to people, through communications. And you have more Pluto in Aquarius could also, manifest. It is, I believe, in more power connected with AI. And when you have things that are involved more with AI, people may be more involved with that than the actual communication, with other people. And I think too, where people are even getting skeptical about things that may be created by AI, and where they might think, okay, I'm communicating with somebody online, but is it something that's AI, generated? I think there was some astrologer on TikTok that somebody thought was like AI generated, and it did turn out to be an actual person. It's a prominent TikTok astrologer. I was surprised that somebody thought that, but it just shows like the skepticism that we're getting in society, more so than ever. And when you have the cynicism and skepticism right there, that shows where you could have diminished communication as a result. And also more could indicate, when you're talking about Pluto and Aquarius, you're talking about more, the death, and maybe not necessarily literal death, but the obliteration of friendships. And if you have more, friendships that are dying out, so to speak, naturally communication can deteriorate, as a result. And you're still also too. With the Pluto and Aquarius transit, can also be expressed in more of an obsession and fixation on the internet and social media. We had that going on even before that, but I think it's going to be even more passion in those matters now. And when you have more of a fixation on the internet and social media, you could start to become more oblivious to your friendships and the communications that are connected with them. And also, too, could this maybe, Pluto Aquarius, indicate being more passionate in terms of being aloof and detached? Maybe people are almost taking more pride in that now, more so than ever. And I think that could be another way that this could be expressed, because you have this freedom, syndrome. And I think with this Pluto and Aquarius transit, and that can include, people at times being free, from having, any kind of close connection, or even matters, with communications with others in general. And another thing too, I think it's interesting, and you may, on the surface, you wouldn't think that this could have anything to do with, the social distancing in life, but we have the current, Saturn and Aries transit, and you may think, well, what does that have to do with this? Well, think about this. Well, Saturn and Aries can manifest in more of a concentration and focus on egocentric and self-centered matters. And when you have, because Saturn is concentration and Aries is more about the self and things that are self-centered. So when you put that together, it could indicate that people are more, focused on doing things for themselves, self-reliance, and not, really, thinking necessarily about other people, which can include reaching out to others and communicating with others. And there may be more work that's involved that is independent and self-reliant with the Saturn and Aries transit. So when you look at that, it does make sense where that could be, factoring in, I believe, that transit into people not being, quite, as social as they had been. And also, too, you're talking about Saturn and Aries can also be expressed in the restriction and limitation in actions in general and activity. And I would say that wouldn't exclude communication and socializing with others. And also, too, Saturn and Aries can also be about, like a lesson that others may have to learn in terms of actions that are courageous despite apprehension. And actions can still include reaching out to others, and communicating with them. I would say, especially like if somebody has, this transit, Saturn and Aries going on in their third house in their natal chart, or say it's conjunct their Mercury or third house ruler, that could indicate, those, something that may be tied in, with communicating with others. But still, in general, I would say, when you're talking about lessons that are connected with one's actions and one's courage, despite, having some kind of fear or apprehension that wouldn't exclude, communicating with others. So from these transits, I could see why things, as far as people, being sociable, being more communicative, why those things are starting to deteriorate in life. And I would just say to others that, out there to see this video, that, even though we have certain transits that may indicate this, again, it's not, as I've said in other videos, and, it was stated many years ago, there was a quote, something like, astrology, may, about the impel compel, thing. So you have to just remember that, astrology could give certain, energy, and give us, certain, like a feel like doing something, we feel like a certain force, but it's not an irresistible force, and we still have our free will, and it's still important to keep the lines of communication open and not let, this internet AI era that we seem to be dominated and just take over to the point where we don't, reach out and communicate, with others, like we had done more so in the past. You don't have to just, eradicate communications with people just for the heck of it, just because you're not in the mood, to talk with somebody. Because think about what you're doing to that other person that wanted to actually have, a friendship and have more consistent communication. People may want to feel like they want to keep things, more superficial and on the surface, but that doesn't mean everybody does. And it's just something, to keep in mind, that we still got to keep the human element, out there. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment. Until next time, Edwin Leonard saying, stay well.